The Dore Lectures on Mental Science. By Thomas Troward. Lecture 7. The Great Affirmative. The Great Affirmative appears in two modes, the cosmic and the individual. In its essence it is the same in both, but in each it works from a different standpoint. It is always the principle of being, that which is, as distinguished from that which is not, but to grasp the true significance of this saying we must understand what is meant by that which is not. It is something more than mere non-existence, for obviously we should not trouble ourselves about what is non-existent. It is that which both is and is not at the same time, and the thing that answers to this description is conditions. The little affirmative is that which affirms particular conditions as all that it can grasp, while the great affirmative grasps a wider conception, the conception of that which gives rise to conditions. Cosmically, it is that power of spirit which sends forth the whole creation as its expression of itself, and it is for this reason that I have drawn attention in the preceding lectures to the idea of the creation ex nihilo of the whole visible universe. As Eastern and Western scriptures alike tell us, it is the breathing forth of original spirit, and if you have followed what I have said regarding the reproduction of this spirit in the individual, that by the very nature of the creative process the human mind must be of the same quality with the divine mind, then we find that a second mode of the originating spirit becomes possible, namely that of operation through the individual mind. But whether acting cosmically or personally, it is always the same spirit and therefore cannot lose its inherent character, which is that of the power which creates ex nihilo. It is the direct contradiction of the maxim ex nihilo nihil fit, nothing can be made out of nothing, and it is the recognition of the presence in ourselves of this power, which can make something out of nothing, that is the key to our further progress. As the logical outcome of the cosmic creative process, the evolutionary work reaches a point where the originating power creates an image of itself, and thus affords a fresh point of departure from which it can work specifically, just as in the cosmic process it works generically. From this new standpoint, it does not in any way contradict the laws of the cosmic order, but proceeds to specialize them, and thus to bring out results through the individual which could not be otherwise attained. Now the Spirit does this by the same method as in the original creation, namely by creating em nihilo, for otherwise it would be bound by the limitations necessarily inherent in the cosmic form of things, and so no fresh creative starting point would have been attained. This is why the Bible lays such stress on the principle of monogenesis, or creation from a single power instead of from a pair or syzygy, and it is on this account that we are told that this oneness of God is the foundation of all the commandments, and that the Son of God is declared to be monogenes or one begotten, for that is the correct translation of the Greek word. The immense importance of this principle of creation from a single power will become apparent as we realize more fully the results proceeding from the assumption of the opposite principle, or the dualism of the creative power, but as the discussion of this great subject would require a volume to itself, I must, at present, content myself with saying that this insistence of the Bible upon the singleness of the creative power is based upon a knowledge which goes to the very root of esoteric principles, and is therefore not to be set aside in favor of dualism systems, though superficially the latter may appear more consonant to reason. If, then, it is possible to put the great affirmation into words, it is that God is one and that this one finds center in ourselves, and if the full meaning of this statement is realized, the logical result will be found to be a new creation both in and from ourselves. We shall realize in ourselves the working of a new principle whose distinguishing feature is its simplicity. It is oneness and is not troubled about any second. Hence what it contemplates is not how its action will be modified by that of some second principle, something which will compel it to work in a particular manner and so limit it, but what it contemplates is its own unity. Then it perceives that its unity consists in a greater and a lesser movement, just as the rotation of the Earth on its axis does not interfere with its rotation round the Sun but are both motions of the same unit, and are definitely related to each other. In like manner we find that the Spirit is moving simultaneously in the macrocosm of the universe and in the microcosm of the individual, and the two movements harmonize because they are that of the same Spirit, and the latter is included in the former and presupposes it. The great affirmation, therefore, is the perception that the I Am is one, always harmonious with itself, and including all things in this harmony for the simple reason that there is no second creative power, and when the individual realizes that this always single power is the root of his own being, and therefore has center in himself and finds expression through him, he learns to trust its singleness and the consequent harmony of its action in him with what it is doing around him. Then he sees that the affirmation, I and my Father are one, is a necessary deduction from a correct apprehension of the fundamental principles of being, and then, on the principle that the less must be included in the greater, he desires that harmonious unity of action be maintained by the adaptation of his own particular movement to the larger movement of the Spirit working as the creative principle through the great whole. In this way we become centers through which the creative forces find specialization by the development of that personal factor on which the specific application of general laws must always depend. A specific sort of individuality is formed, capable of being the link between the great spiritual power of the universal and the manifestation of the relative in time and space because it consciously partakes of both, and because the individual of this class recognizes the singleness of the Spirit as the starting point of all things. He endeavors to withdraw his mind from all arguments derived from external conditions, whether past or present, and to fix it upon the forward movement of the Spirit which he knows to be always identical both in the universe and in himself. He ceases the attempt to dictate to the Spirit, because he does not see in it a mere blind force, but reveres it as the supreme intelligence, and on the other hand he does not grovel before it in doubt and fear, because he knows it is one with himself and is realizing itself through him, and therefore cannot have any purpose antagonistic to his own individual welfare. Realizing this, he deliberately places his thoughts under the guidance of the Divine Spirit, knowing that his outward acts and conditions must thereby be brought into harmony with the great forward movement of the Spirit, not only at the stage he has now reached, but at all future stages. He does not at all deny the power of his own thought as the creative agent in his own personal world. On the contrary, it is precisely on the knowledge of this fact that his perception of the true adjustment between the principles of life is based, but for this very reason he is the more solicitous to be led by that wisdom which can see what he cannot see, so that his personal control over the conditions of his own life may be employed to its continual increase and development. In this way our affirmation of the I Am ceases to be the petulant assertion of our limited personality and becomes the affirmation that the great I Am affirms its own I Amness both in us and through us, and thus our use of the words becomes in very truth the great affirmative, or that which is the root of all being as distinguished from that which has no being in itself but is merely externalized by being as the vehicle for its expression. We shall realize our true place as subordinate creative centers, perfectly independent of existing conditions because the creative process is that of monogenesis and requires no other factor than the Spirit for its exercise, but at the same time subordinate to the Divine Spirit in the greatness of its inherent forward movement because there is only one Spirit and it cannot from one center antagonize what it is doing from another. Thus the great affirmation makes us children of the great King, at once living in obedience to that power which is above us, and exercising this same power over all that world of secondary causation which is below us. Thus in our measure and station each one of us will receive the mission of the I Am. Lecture 7. The Great Affirmative. End of lecture. Need help understanding Troward's teachings? The Thomas Troward lectures contain very deep and powerful information, but to get the most out of them, require repeated listening and in-depth study. Troward had only one personal student, Genevieve Behrend, and her book Your Invisible Power distills the essence of Troward's lectures in a concise and easy-to-understand format. For many, this is a much preferred way to learn Troward's teachings. Click the link below this video to visit yourinvisiblepower.us and learn more about Genevieve Behrend's recently updated book.